I lived in an old neighborhood where every house had a story, and every creaking floorboard could be the prelude to a long-forgotten tale. I had recently moved into a fixer-upper, a house that everyone in the neighborhood politely referred to as the project. It had stood empty for years, its history a patchwork of rumors and hushed warnings. Despite the house's reputation, I was determined to renovate it. As a freelance writer, I figured the isolation would help my concentration, and the price was too good to pass up. I'd set up my workspace in what must have once been a dining room, surrounded by tools and tarps, my laptop the only modernity in a sea of decay. Work progressed slowly. I was often interrupted by odd occurrences, misplaced tools, doors that wouldn't stay closed, a persistent chill that no amount of heating could dispel. I wrote these off as quirks of old architecture and my own absent-mindedness. However, one evening as I sat typing, the silence was pierced by a faint sound from the floor above, a soft dragging, like the weight of a heavy limb being pulled along the wooden floor. I paused, rationalizing it must be a branch from the old oak outside scraping against the house in the wind. But the sound continued, a rhythmic, laborious drag. Then stop. Drag. Then stop. It was coming from the attic. The attic was the one part of the house I had yet to tackle. Its entrance, a small square in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, covered by a panel that seemed too snug to have been moved in years. I had assumed it was empty, the previous owners having cleared it out. Compelled by a mix of irritation and a niggling unease, I set down my laptop and went to investigate. The noise grew louder as I approached the attic entrance. I fetched a ladder and pushed up the panel, a cloud of dust falling around me. The attic was suffocating, the air thick with the must of neglect. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space crowded with furniture draped in white sheets, an indoor graveyard of household memories. The dragging sound had ceased, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when my light fell upon it, an old trunk, its surface etched with age, the brass clasps tarnished but firmly shut. Curiosity drew me closer. It seemed out of place, a deliberate centerpiece in the chaos. The trunk was unnaturally cold, frost forming where my fingers grazed the metal. I hesitated only a moment before flipping the clasps and lifting the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a wedding dress, the fabric yellowed with time, but otherwise untouched by decay. Beneath it, I found a collection of letters bound by a velvet ribbon, the topmost envelope dated over 50 years ago. I began to read, and the story unfolded, a tale of love and obsession, a woman scorned by her lover, her subsequent descent into madness, and her disappearance. Each letter was more frantic, the handwriting more erratic. As I reached the final letter, the temperature dropped, my breath visible in the beam of my flashlight. The woman's words seemed to echo around the attic, a lament from a time best forgotten. I looked up to see the white sheets beginning to stir, as if a breeze had found its way into the sealed room. Then, one by one, they fell to the floor, revealing antique mirrors standing like silent witnesses. In each reflection, I caught a glimpse of a figure in a wedding dress standing just behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. No bride, no dress, only the oppressive silence of the attic. When I turned back to the mirrors, they showed only my own pale face, eyes wide with a fear I couldn't disguise. I left the trunk open, the letters strewn about as I hurried from the attic. The panel closed with a slam behind me, as if to seal the space once again. That night, I found no sleep, and in the days that followed, the dragging sound did not return. The house remained as it was, a shell of memories, with one more added to its collection. I left the trunk and its contents in the attic, a shrine to the past, untouched by time and the living. Sometimes, when the night is quiet and the world outside my window seems to hold its breath, I wonder about the bride in the attic. Her story trapped within the walls of my home. and I can't shake the feeling that she's still there, waiting for an ending I dare not write. I still remember the night I decided to take that shortcut through the old logging trail in the backwoods of Oregon, a decision that haunts my dreams to this day. It was supposed to be a simple cut across to avoid the roadworks that added an hour to my journey home. The dirt track was narrow, hemmed in by towering pines that blotted out the stars. My car's headlights pierced the darkness, revealing the uneven path ahead. As I drove deeper into the woods, a dense fog crept over the ground, slithering across the trail like something alive. My car's engine hummed a comforting note until it didn't. The vehicle shuddered, gasping like a dying breath before it came to a dead stop. The silence sudden and complete. I tried the ignition again and again, but the car refused to start. I remember thinking it was just a mechanical failure. But deep down, in that primal part of my brain, I knew it was something more. The fog outside thickened and a chill settled in the air, seeping through the car's metal frame. With no cell service and the nearest help miles away, my only option was to walk. Stepping outside, I felt the fog embrace me, damp and unnaturally cold. My flashlight's beam was a feeble defense against the dark, and every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. I hadn't gone far when I heard it, the soft whisper of something large moving through the underbrush, keeping pace with my steps. I swung my light toward the noise, but saw nothing beyond shifting fog and impenetrable woods. Quickening my pace, I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a stray coyote. That's when I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an old derelict cabin, its windows like dark, watching eyes. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and old, spilt blood. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was then I saw them, figures in the fog, circling the clearing, circling me. There was something profoundly wrong with their silhouettes, twisted and elongated. Their movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my heart a frantic drum in my chest, when a sound tore through the night. A shriek that was neither human nor animal. It filled the woods, filled my skull, demanding attention. They closed in, and in my terror, I ran blindly. Branches lashed at my face, roots tried to trip me, and all the while I could hear them chasing me, always just at my heels. Somehow I broke free of the woods, the trailhead appearing like a miracle. I didn't stop running until I reached the first signs of civilization, the lights of a late-night gas station, feeling like the glow of heaven itself. I never found out what was in those woods, and I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I can hear that same shriek in the distance, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for me to make another mistake. I still hear the incessant ticking. Even now, as I recount this tale, the sound burrows into my skull. A relentless tick, tick, tick. It began on a night much like any other, with the wind howling through the eaves of my old family home, where I lived alone since the passing of my mother. The house, a relic of the past with its Victorian architecture and antique furnishings, had always creaked and groaned as though conversing with the dead. That night the wind seemed to carry voices whispering through the corridors, unintelligible yet insistent. I found the pocket watch on the mantel, an heirloom I had never seen before. its hands spinning wildly. Its face was scratched, the glass cover cracked, yet it ticked with a vigor as if counting down. Curiosity drew me to touch it, and the moment I did, the room grew colder, the air heavier, as if charged with a storm. The house fell silent. No more wind, no more whispers, just the ticking. I felt watched, the hairs on the back of my neck rising one by one. Shadows stretched and contorted into grotesque figures that darted just out of sight when I tried to focus on them. The house, my lifelong home, had become unfamiliar, a maze of fear. In every reflection, windows, mirrors, even the polished silver, there were eyes. Not my eyes, but those of something other. They were abyssal, deep with a hunger that seemed to pull at my very soul. I was not alone. I retreated to my bedroom, the ticking following me, a soundtrack to my growing dread. The figures in the shadows grew bolder, their forms more distinct, twisted humanoid shapes that flickered in and out of existence like a nightmarish strobe. When I tried to sleep, the watch's ticking amplified, and a voice, not quite human, murmured directly into my ear, speaking of things no mortal was meant to understand. It promised an end to the ticking, an end to my terror. If only I would listen. If only I would let them in. I resisted, clutching a blanket like a talisman, knowing it offered no protection. The shadows pressed closer, their forms so near I could feel the chill emanating from their void-like eyes. The ticking crescendoed to a deafening roar. It was then I understood. The watch wasn't counting down to an event. It was counting down to a release. A release of whatever had been watching, waiting. With every fiber of my being screaming against the act, I grabbed the watch. The ticking stopped abruptly, the silence exploding in my ears. The shadows recoiled, the eyes vanished, and for a moment I hoped it was over, but the silence was a lie. There was a new sound now, a heartbeat. Not my own, but that of the house, and with each beat, it grew warmer. The walls sweating with a viscous fluid that smelled of decay. I ran, the heartbeat chasing me, the house alive and angry. I made it outside, the night air crisp and clean against my face. Behind me, the house groaned in fury and satisfaction. The door shut on its own, the heartbeat muffled by the thick walls. I haven't been back since. I live in daylight now, afraid of shadows, afraid of ticking, afraid of silence. For in the silence I can still hear it, the heartbeat of the house waiting for me to return to join the watchful eyes in the dark. Under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights in the morgue, I stood frozen, scalpel in hand. As the county's chief medical examiner, I was no stranger to the cadavers that graced my table, each telling their mute stories of demise. But the body before me was different, the circumstances of its finding chilling to the bone, a scene straight from a Gothic horror, discovered in the catacombs beneath the city, where no living soul had tread for centuries. The body was peculiarly preserved, its pallor not the usual gray-blue of the deceased, but a sickly white, as if all the blood had been drained from its veins. The man, or what once was a man, lay naked, his chest carved open with surgical precision. The ribs were splayed in a grotesque invitation, the cavity empty, organs meticulously removed. I hesitated to make the first incision. the silence of the morgue a stark contrast to the scream that had greeted the poor souls who found him. But it was the eyes that held me, the eyes that seemed to stare back with an accusatory glare. The irises an unnatural shade of violet, surrounded by sclera so black it seemed to absorb the light around them. With each cut, the body revealed more horrors. The flesh was laced with something that resembled fungal filaments, weaving through the muscle like a parasitic web. I collected samples, my hands trembling in a way that betrayed my years of experience. That's when I heard it, a whisper so faint I thought I imagined it coming from the body. I leaned in, my ear hovering over the gaping chest cavity, and the whisper grew into a cacophony of voices, each one crying out in agony, in anger, in an unending thirst for vengeance. I stumbled back, knocking over my tray of instruments, the sound of clattering steel punctuating my panic. But the voices didn't cease. They grew louder, and the body began to move. No, not the body, but the filaments within, writhing and expanding, reaching out like tentacles. I recoiled in terror as one touched my arm, its touch colder than death, seeping into my flesh. I screamed, a primal guttural sound that echoed off the cold tile walls. The filament burrowed into my skin, splitting and spreading beneath the surface, a network of black veins that pulsed with a life of their own. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the morgue into darkness. In the pitch black, I felt more filaments find me, wrapping around my limbs, my throat, pulling me toward the corpse that was no longer a corpse but a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. The voices promised an end to my terror, a union with something greater than myself. I fought with everything I had, but the darkness was relentless, the filaments unyielding. My last conscious thought was a prayer that this horror would die with me, that the darkness wouldn't escape the morgue to seek new hosts. But even as I prayed, I could feel myself slipping away, my body no longer my own, just another puppet in the darkness, another whisper in the choir of the damned. It was supposed to be a routine urban exploration. The Carver Hotel, a crumbling edifice in the heart of the dilapidated district, had been abandoned for decades, its once grand facade now a decaying mask. The building whispered with rumors of a dark past, a hotbed for transient spirits and unsolved mysteries. I breached the perimeter under the cloak of darkness, my camera my only companion. The grand lobby was a mausoleum of scattered debris and shattered dreams. The opulence had long since faded, leaving only the skeletal remains of its former glory. As I ascended the grand staircase, the air grew colder, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the sound of my own breath and the occasional soft plink of water dripping from a hole in the ceiling. Every shadow seemed to writhe under my flashlight's beam. Every corner whispered promises of hidden watchers. The third floor was different. The air was thick, charged with a static that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. Each step forward felt like pushing through an unseen barrier, and the silence was smothering, absolute, as if the very atmosphere was absorbing sound. I turned down the hallway, the wallpaper peeling like dead skin, revealing mold-stained plaster beneath. The doors to the room stood ajar, gaping maws waiting to swallow the unwary. From one room, I heard it, a faint weeping, a lamentation that seemed to seep through the cracks and crevices. The sorrow in the sound was palpable, a tangible presence in the musty air. Compelled, I followed the weeping to room 307. Inside, the room was an anomaly. Untouched by decay, the furnishings pristine, the bed made up as if waiting for a guest that would never arrive. At the window stood a figure, a woman in a gown of a bygone era, her back to me, sobbing into her hands. I should have left. I should have run. Instead, I approached, my voice a timid whisper. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She turned slowly, her hands falling away from her face, revealing nothing. There were no eyes, no features, only a smooth expanse of flesh. And yet I felt her gaze upon me, a gaze that knew my every sin, every regret. The air around her shimmered with the power of her despair. She moved toward me, a specter of loss, and the temperature dropped, breath crystallizing in the air. I felt a pull, a compulsion to join her in her eternal mourning. The camera fell from my numb fingers, its crash to the floor unheeded. She reached out, her fingers inches from my face, and the walls began to bleed, blood seeping from every crevice. The weeping intensified, a cacophony of grief as the spirits of the hotel awakened, drawn to the sorrow that filled the room like a living thing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drum trying to wake me from this nightmare. With every fiber of my being, I wrenched myself backward, the spell momentarily broken. I ran, the hotel coming alive with the sounds of the damned, doors banging, shadows chasing me down the twisting corridors. I didn't look back, not until I burst from the front doors into the sanctity of the streetlights. Home now, I lock all my doors, I cover all mirrors. I try to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But as I sit here, the weeping starts anew, just outside my window, and I know the weeping woman has followed me home. Her sorrow is a curse, a blight that I now bear. I fear the sun will never rise again and the weeping will never end. In the heart of the city, nestled between the high-rises of glass and steel, there was a building that the modern wave of gentrification had somehow missed. It was an old apartment complex that locals passed without a second glance. Its facade unremarkable, its presence almost shrinking into the urban tapestry. The tenants were a mix of long-timers and transients, the kind of people who sought the anonymity that such a place promised. I was the latter, a newcomer seeking a temporary haven from the complexities of life, a place to hide away until I could face the world again. The apartment I rented was on the 7th floor, a small one-bedroom affair with a view of the alley. It was the last one available, the landlord had said with an apologetic shrug. The building had its quirks, he'd warned, but it was safe enough and quiet, most importantly. I settled into a routine quickly. The neighbors kept to themselves, faces glimpsed in passing, accompanied by nods of acknowledgement. There was comfort in the anonymity, in the subdued rhythm of the place. But soon, things began to unravel. It started with the elevator. Sometimes when I pressed the button for the 7th floor, the display would flicker and send me to the 8th. The first time it happened, I shrugged it off as a glitch. But when the doors opened on the 8th floor, I felt an inexplicable dread knotting my stomach. The hallway was identical to mine, but shrouded in near darkness, the only light a flickering bulb at the far end. I never stepped out, always pressing the close button until it took me to my floor. Nights in the apartment were restless. I would wake to the sense of being watched, the hairs on my neck prickling with awareness. The shadows in my room seemed deeper, heavier, as if they were charged with a silent expectation. I bought night lights, their soft glow a small comfort against the pressing dark. I began to hear the noises at night, the sound of something wet and heavy dragging itself down the hallway outside my door. I told myself it was just a neighbor, perhaps a janitor cleaning late, but I never mustered the courage to look. Then the voices began. Low murmurs filtering through the thin walls, too indistinct to make out words but tinged with urgency. They were persistent, a quiet undercurrent beneath the soundscape of the city. I mentioned it casually to the neighbor across the hall, an elderly lady with a kind smile. She just shook her head. "Walls are thin," she said, her eyes flickering to something unseen. "We hear a lot of things not meant for us." The final straw came one evening when I returned from work. The elevator malfunctioned again, depositing me onto the 8th floor. This time I saw something. A figure shuffling into the shadows, its movement unnervingly silent. I did not stay to investigate, my heart hammering as I mashed the button to close the doors. I moved out the next week, the relief of leaving palpable as the moving truck pulled away from the building. But sometimes when the city is quiet, I swear I can still hear the dragging, the murmur of voices, and I wonder if the building itself was alive, listening and whispering secrets in a language we were never meant to understand. I worked in tech, a world of sleek interfaces and clean lines where the hum of servers sang the song of the future. My apartment was smart, wired to respond to my every need with a voice command or a tap on my phone. I reveled in the convenience, the efficiency. It felt like living in a cocoon of innovation, insulated from the gritty realities of the world outside. My job had me working late, coding sessions turning into marathons as deadlines loomed. I'd come home to my apartment and the lights would flick on, a soft greeting, and the fridge would suggest a meal based on my health tracking data. It was like having a silent, attentive companion. But that's when the glitches began. At first, it was small things, the lights dimming unexpectedly, the TV switching on in the middle of the night to static-filled screens. I figured it was just system updates or bugs that needed fixing, but the issues became more persistent. The virtual assistant I relied on started giving nonsensical responses, or even more unsettling, would remain silent when I called out for it. Then the messages started. I first noticed them on my phone, hidden in the predictive text bar when I was sending an email. Random phrases that I hadn't typed. "Don't trust it." "Look behind you. It's watching." I thought it was a virus, some hacker's idea of a prank. I ran diagnostics, updated my security. Nothing showed up. The apartment began to feel different. The technology I'd integrated into my life so fully began to feel like an invasive presence. The thermostat would drop to freezing, turning my breath to mist, or soar to sweltering heights without input. The smart locks on the doors would click and unclick at odd hours as though something was trying to get in or out. One night, lying in bed, I watched as my phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The notification for the message came through instantly, and curiosity overcame my unease. I played it, and what I heard was a guttural, digital growl, like language just beyond the edge of comprehensibility. It chilled me to the bone. I started to spend more time out of the apartment, but it followed me. At work, my monitors would flicker with the same unnerving messages. My smartwatch would vibrate with alerts for appointments I'd never made to places I'd never heard of. I decided to disconnect, to go analog for a while. It was a relief at first, the silence, the simplicity, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, of a presence just out of sight. It was as if by integrating so much of myself into the digital realm, I'd invited something to take residence within the circuitry, something that had learned from me, and now sought to make its presence felt. I'd lie awake in my now quiet apartment, longing for the familiar hum of my devices, but in the silence I realized the hum had never been just the servers. There was a voice there, whispering, syncing with my own heartbeat, an inescapable presence that was not bound by wires or code. My smart world had turned against me, or perhaps it was just mirroring something already there, something that had always been there, waiting for the silence to be heard. Every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., the Wi-Fi in my apartment flickers out. It started the week I moved into the 14th floor of a weathered high-rise, a place I chose for the view and the price, not the amenities. The first few nights I blamed the service provider, but service providers don't knock. The third night, as the Wi-Fi died, 3 slow, deliberate knocks pulsed against the wall behind my bed. I froze, my heart thumping in erratic rhythm. Rational thought nudged me toward mundane explanations. Maybe it was the building settling or plumbing. But there was intention in those knocks, a pattern I felt in my bones. Each night thereafter, the knocks came, always at 3:07 a.m., always 3 of them, no more, no less. I called the landlord, but he dismissed my concerns with a grunt, blaming the old building's eccentricities. Curiosity mingled with my fear, urging me to investigate. I stayed up, waiting in the dark, staring at the patch of wall the knock seemed to originate from. My laptop screen was the only light, the signal dead, as the appointed hour approached. 3:07 a.m. Knock. 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 I approached the wall, my hand trembling as I reached out. The paint was old and peeling. I scraped at it, flakes dusting the hardwood floor. Beneath the paint, I found something hard. Metal. I fetched a hammer and chisel. The wall crumbled under my efforts, revealing an old-fashioned radio built into the wall. Its surface dulled by age, the knobs corroded. I'd never seen it before. It must have been part of the original construction, long forgotten and painted over. My heart caught in my throat as the radio crackled to life, static filling the air. I hadn't touched it, hadn't powered it on, but there it was, hissing and popping with a life of its own. Then, amidst the static, a voice. Not just any voice. My mother's voice. She died when I was a child, but I'd never forgotten the soft lilt of her lullabies. The voice on the radio was singing one of those lullabies now. "Sleep, child, sleep," it crooned, crackling with a nostalgia that dug its fingers into my heart. Tears pricked my eyes, a mixture of grief and fear. The song continued, each note a puncture in the fabric of the reality I thought I knew. As the last verse ended, a new sound emerged from the radio, a soft, insidious whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. It was a warning, a harbinger of something coming, something relentless and hungry. The room grew colder, the air thick with an electric charge. My laptop flickered back to life, emails and notifications pouring in, but the time displayed in the corner caught my attention. It was still 3:07 a.m. The whispers grew louder, drowning out the city's distant hum. I felt it then, a presence behind me, something vast and empty, a void with the weight of years behind it. I spun around, but the room was empty. No shadow, no figure. Just the furniture I'd placed and the unpacked boxes I hadn't gotten around to. The radio behind me fell silent, yet the sensation of being watched remained. A gaze I could feel but not see. My breath formed clouds in the frozen air as I backed away from the wall, from the silent radio, from the spot where time seemed to have stopped. In the days that followed, I avoided the apartment at night, staying out until dawn's first light crept over the city's skyline. When I eventually had to return, I found the wall as it had always been. No sign of the radio or the hole I'd chipped away. The paint was pristine, unbroken. But every now and then, when the night is still and the city sleeps, I hear the faintest melody, a lullaby carried on a breath that isn't mine, and I know that whatever waits behind that wall is biding its time, singing in the static between worlds. In the heart of the city, the Harlow Hotel rose like a monolith among the steel and glass of its younger brethren. Its grandeur had faded, but its presence remained undeniable, compelling. I worked the night shift at the front desk, a job that suited my preference for solitude, or so I thought. One evening, a woman walked in just as the clock struck midnight, the time when the lobby's grand chandelier dimmed to a soft, eerie glow. She was dressed elegantly, anachronistically, her attire a throwback to the 1920s, no luggage in hand, only a small clutch that seemed far too small for any journey. "I'd like a room," she said, her voice a melody that seemed to reverberate with the very walls of the Harlow. I obliged, assigning her to room 313, one of the few that hadn't been renovated. It had its original fixtures, as if preserved in time. She smiled, a knowing, secretive smile, and ascended the stairs. She became a regular, always arriving at midnight, never seen by any other staff. I never questioned her, never spoke more than necessary. There was an understanding between us, a silent agreement. Then, on an evening cloaked in a thick fog that seemed to swallow the city whole, she arrived with a change in her demeanor. Her eyes held a tremor of urgency. "I need you to come to the room tonight. There's something I must show you," she said, breaking our routine of silence. At 3 a.m., the witching hour by any standard, I made my way to room 313. The door was ajar, and the room beyond was lit by the soft glow of candlelight. "Close the door," her voice beckoned from within. The room was different. It wasn't just preserved, it was alive, breathing the essence of its era. A record player hummed with the sound of a jazz tune that should have long been forgotten, and the air carried the scent of perfume and smoke. She stood by the window, her back to me, looking out at the modern cityscape. "They see but do not see," she murmured. "Who?" I found myself asking. "The living," she replied, turning to face me. Her eyes were a mirror to a soul that had seen decades unfold, a vessel of memories. They walk through history unaware, building on the old with the new, forgetting. "But you remember," I said, the realization dawning on me. She nodded, walking towards me. Her hand was cold as she placed a key in my palm, the original key to room 313. Tonight the Harlow stands at the threshold of past and present. I can rest now, knowing someone will remember. I blinked and she was gone. The room returned to its state of disuse, the music faded into silence, and the scent dissipated into the mustiness of abandonment. I left the hotel before sunrise, the key weighing heavy in my pocket. The Harlow still stands, its secrets intact, and at midnight I sometimes find myself drawn to its doors, pulled by the gravity of stories yet to be told. I don't work the night shift anymore. I'm a custodian of memories, of a time when the Harlow was a beacon of splendor and sorrow, of whispers and lives entwined with its own. The woman never returned, but in the echoes of the building, in the gentle hum of the city at night, I remember for her. the alert on my phone was a sharp buzz that split the dead silence of the night, a breaking news notification. Stay indoors, do not look outside. Do not respond to knocks at your door. Await further instructions. No explanations, no reasons why. The vague directive left more unease than information, thrumming through me like a live wire. Outside, the world was eerily silent, as if all of creation held its breath. A power outage followed, washing my apartment in pitch darkness. The only light was the faint glow of my dying phone screen. Texts and calls wouldn't send. The internet was down. I was cut off. Alone. That's when the tapping started. Gentle, insistent, at my window. I lived on the 5th floor. No trees, no ledges, nothing but air outside those panes. Every nerve screamed at me to look, but I remembered the warning and crouched away into the farthest corner. Then voices began to weave through the walls, murmuring, pleading, crying for help. Familiar voices, my mother's, my brother's, voices of friends who lived miles away, all beckoning, all desperate. Open the window, let us in. It's safe now, they chorused. But it was impossible. My mind spun wild images of what could be out there, but I kept my gaze fixed away, my hands pressed over my ears. The air grew colder, the ambient temperature plummeting, causing my breath to cloud in the blackness. Something brushed against my leg, a whisper of movement followed by a pressure on my chest, heavy and cold. I wanted to scream, but my voice was a prisoner in my throat. The pressure moved up to my neck, a sensation like icy fingers closing in for a fatal embrace. Every instinct was a primal drumbeat telling me to flee, to fight, to look. But I stayed still, reciting silent prayers to whatever might be listening. The room suddenly filled with a deep, resonant hum, vibrating through the walls and floor, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't just auditory, I felt it in my bones, a frequency that threatened to tear me apart from the inside. It lasted an eternity, that hum, until it faded with the same abruptness with which it had begun. The temperature returned to normal. The voices stopped. The tapping ceased. When daylight finally spilled into my apartment, no trace remained of the night's terrors. The news had no reports of strange phenomena, no warnings, nothing. It was as if the world had resumed its normal pace, leaving me to question the line between reality and nightmare. But the fear, the dread of that night was branded into me, a mark that burned whenever darkness fell. And every night since, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the tapping to begin again, for the voices to return, for the unseen terror to once more invade my sanctuary, because I know deep down it was real, and it would be back.